Okay. Excuse me, Lily Adams? You're Lily Adams? Just making sure. I'm trying to get my seat configuration right, and I've got you somewhere else. We'll square it away later. Okay, what's the answer to A? You're Adam? Are you Adam? Yes, what's the answer? Oh, come on. Find the marginal willingness to pay at a quantity of 10. You can figure it out, Adam. Come on. Yeah, that's what that curve is. You playing with me?
No, I wasn't. I got
Okay.
Use 10, so the price is 30.
So, the willingness to pay is? Exactly. And that's real cash, right? Okay? All right, so it's 30. Now find the consumer surplus for 30. What's the answer? Here we go.
It's $50 because you're taking the area under the curve at 30, so it'd be like 1/2 times 10.
Everybody agree? We're making progress. Okay, suppose the price falls to 20. How much will consumer surplus increase due to these two different causes, right? Here we go. But I want you to tell me what portion of that increase is due to buyers entering the market versus what portion is due to existing buyers paying a lower price.
Okay, well,
The decomposition, right?
Okay, so 2/3 would be 2, existing buyers paying lower price, 2/3 would be 5.
I'm sorry, you have your hand up. Does that suggest you don't agree?
Or C.
Yeah?
Yeah, I got it.
So you agree with that? What about D?
D had not 100, because you're taking the other half of the area, so just 10 times 10.
Do you agree with that? Okay. All right. So Adam told us the first answer is 30. Consumer surplus is 50. When it falls to 20, a portion of that is due to additional buyers now completing transactions because the price is below their willingness to pay, and that amount of the increase in consumer surplus turns out to be $50. And then secondly, as both of you pointed out, with regard to the gain to those buyers who not only were buying before the price fall, but are buying after the price fall, what's their increase in consumer surplus, right? Okay. Now, we've done one side of the market. We understand what the benefits are to buyers. Now we want to look at what happens on the supply or seller side of the market. And as we'll see in a few lectures from now, the supply function or supply curve turns out to be based on the cost that a particular seller incurs in offering a good or service to the marketplace, right? So here we're just going to say this cost plays the same role as the willingness to pay by buyers who are consumers in the marketplace. The cost that sellers face is their willingness to sell, and it plays exactly the same role as buyers' willingness to pay. Right? But their willingness to sell is going to be a direct function of what it costs them to produce a good, or taking into account, as in the case of Julie Roberts, whatever her opportunity cost is, right? Okay. That includes all resources that are used to produce the good, including the value of the seller's time. And we'll go through the same process. We've got 3 potential sellers. They are in the business of mowing or cutting lawns. And Jack has the lowest cost. His opportunity cost is only $10. Janet's opportunity cost is $20, and Chrissy's opportunity cost is $35. As before, we can proceed to construct what is the supply schedule for these 3 sellers in this particular market. And as I indicated, their cost is also their willingness to sell. So once again, if the price is above their willingness to sell, they're going to benefit, right? And if the price is above their willingness to sell, they're going to be able to consummate a transaction. Okay. Derive the supply schedule. Okay. For a price from 0 to 9, is there any quantity supplied to the market? No. Because it would be irrational for any one of these 3 sellers to offer their services if the price was 9 or below. However, at a price 10 up to 19, Jack is going to be engaged, right? For a price above 20, Janet will be engaged as well. And then finally, for a price 35 and above, Chrissy will also be engaged. So we can take this schedule and construct a stair-step supply function. Just noting on the graph here, all we're doing is mapping from this schedule to the graph of the relationship between price and quantity, looking at the behavior of sellers. And what's going to drive their behavior is what is their willingness to sell versus the price that emerges in the marketplace. Right? That's all you have to know to determine whether or not they actually are going to supply a service and consummate a transaction. So each one of the points in the table is represented in the stair-step supply function. Okay? Now, once again, as in the case of the demand curve, at each Q, the height of the supply curve is the cost of the marginal seller. Marginal seller in the sense that that's the seller that would leave the market if the price were any lower. This is Jack's cost here. This is Janet's cost here. At this point in the stair step, the final point is Chrissy's cost. Okay, now, producer surplus. Surprise, surprise. The benefit on the sell side is the area above the supply curve up to the price. Right? And that total area will represent the total total producer surplus in the market. Okay, then going through this process, suppose the price is $25. I can't do this computation quite obviously unless I know what the price is, right? So if somebody will ask you, what is the producer surplus? There are 2 factual bits of data that you need what is the willingness to pay? Or better yet, if I have the supply curve, I don't have to ask for what I said willingness to pay. Strike that. Willingness to sell. But if I don't have that information, but I give you the supply curve, you know what the willingness to sell is, right? But you can't do the computation unless you know price. And for a price here of $25, Jack's producer surplus will turn out to be 15. And it also turns out that Janet captures some surplus. And why is that? Why does she capture surplus? Yes?
She's below the price.
What is she?
She's her price to sell is 5.
Right. Her actual willingness to sell is $20. The transaction price is $25. She captures the surplus of $5. Chrissy, however, captures nothing, in large part because the price is below her willingness to sell. And the total surplus, summing across both Jack and Janet, is $20. And in a very symmetric fashion, the total producer surplus equals the area above the supply curve under the price up to the quantity that's moving through the market. Right? It's exactly analogous to what happens on the buy side or the demand side with respect to consumer surplus. Okay? Let's look at, once again, the case of the market for shoes. And now we're looking at the supply side for shoes. And we've got a smooth curve because there are thousands of people that are offering shoes in this marketplace on the sell side. And let's suppose that the price is $40. And our measurement then with regard to total producer surplus is very straightforward. However, we can look at any point along this curve and ask ourselves a question for a seller that's located at that particular point. What is their benefit? What's their net benefit? And that net benefit can be easily computed as represented by the double-sided arrow that's red here. And for the marginal seller at 15,000 shoes, that particular seller captures a surplus of $10. Right? Now, that's just one marginal seller, but I can look all the way across that supply curve. And when I do so, I'm going to end up summing up all the surpluses from the point here on the supply curve all the way out to the price of $40 that we're assuming in this computation or in this example. Okay? It being producer surplus, is the area between price and the supply curve out to the quantity that's moving through the market, and it's represented by this pink triangle. Proceeding in the same fashion, looking at the height of the triangle, and proceeding with the computation of the area, it is 1/2 times the base times the height. The height is very clearly from 15 to 40. That's the $25. The quantity that's moving through the market is also 25,000 units, and thus we get 312,500, right? Multiplying by 1,000, assuming that the shoes moving through is not 25, but 25,000, right? Okay, so that is our computation with regard to consumer surplus, and proceeding with the same investigation about what happens when the price falls. Now, when the price falls, consumer surplus is going to fall. Clearly, did I say consumer surplus? Why didn't you correct me? Producer surplus is going to fall. However, consumer surplus in that marketplace is going to rise, right? Okay. If price falls to $30, and we ask ourselves, what is the new producer surplus? If it turns out to be $112.50. And once again, that fall in consumer surplus can be decomposed into two components. One component is sellers leaving the market, okay? And we're going to give up that portion of what was formerly the producer surplus that was being computed. And secondly, those sellers that remain in the market, that is to say, still consummate transactions, the amount of their producer surplus for what they're selling is going to fall. Okay? And here's the two areas. This is the fall in producer surplus due to sellers leaving the market. And then a pink rectangle, shaded once again in green, is the fall in producer surplus due to the remaining sellers getting a lower price. Okay? Okay, let's turn to a second example, focusing on the supply side. And we'll have the same kind of analysis. Find the marginal seller's cost at a quantity of 10. Find the total producer surplus for a price of 20. Suppose the price rises to 30, and when it rises to 30, we know producer surplus is going to increase. But let's decompose that producer surplus into two components, namely additional sellers coming into the market and the former sellers getting a higher price for the quantity that they're selling. Okay, visit with your neighbors, do the computation, and tell me what the answer is. I don't know how these sheets got screwed up, but a couple of people are way out of space. Why don't we, on Tuesday, I'll give you the best representation, you and Stan, and then when I'm lecturing, let's go around and get it corrected. Because I got, Adam, for example, is sitting 3 seats in. I don't know how that happened. Maybe he just made a mistake about putting the number of his seats. And Lily's all the way over here. When I got her on the sheet, I've got her here. I mean, those are big mistakes, but a lot of them are right. But okay. Okay, Sarah, what's the answer for A?
For A.
For A.
It would be 20 years.
So we come to the quantity 10, you come up to the supply curve, and you get your willingness to sell by just coming over from the supply curve to the vertical axis, right? Okay. What about B? Yes? Does everybody agree? Okay, let's move on. All right, what about the decomposition when the price rises to 30? And we need two answers here. Yes? 2, 3, 4. 25 for which? C? Okay. Everybody agree? Good. Okay. Here are the answers. Obviously, the willingness to sell is 20 at the quantity of 10. That's the marginal seller, right? The total producer surplus is 100. And then if the price rises, we decompose it into the two components. The one component here is the new sellers that come into the market. What do they capture incrementally of consumer surplus? That's represented by the hashed blue area. That's 25. But in addition, all of the sellers that were selling before the price rise, when price was only 20, now they're gaining this entire area, this rectangle from height 20 to 30 out over the quantity that they were previously selling, right? So that turns out to be 100. You, Mr. Wu? Okay. By the way, some people put down the wrong numbers on their seats. I know this is complicated, but come on. You look under the seat and put the numbers. I took your numbers, and then I took all your photographs and put them with your numbers. But you're Mr. Wu. Thank God. That's great. I stand corrected. You're Mr. Kim. Good. We don't have to correct that. My mistake. All right. Okay. Let's go on. Now, what's this all mean? How can we summarize this, and why does it make good, intuitive sense, everything that we've done up till now? We've represented that consumer surplus is whatever the inherent value is to each buyer, less the amount they have to pay for the good. Makes good sense, right? And it's the buyer's gain from participating in the market. And by participating in the market, I mean that they consummate a transaction, right? What happens on the sell side? That's the amount received by sellers, less the cost to those sellers, which is their willingness to sell. And it's the seller's gains from participating in the market. Remember, one of the principles in the first lecture is their mutual gains from trade. The mutual gains here are represented by the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. And the total surplus is the sum of both consumer and producer surplus. And it's the total gains from trade in the market. And more simply, for those transactions that are completed, it's the value to the buyers less the cost to the sellers. By the way, whatever you do from this point forward in this class, every time you're looking at a question about market performance or market failures, or when we go into more deeply environmental economics and look at externalities, I always want you to ask yourself the following question. What is the inherent value to the buy side of the market, whatever the market might be? What is the inherent value to the sell side of the market? It'll always turn out to give you insights and clarity that you otherwise wouldn't have, particularly for thorny, more complicated economic problems. Okay? So the total surplus is the value to buyers less the cost to the sellers. And in terms of allocating the market or the society's scarce resources, that total surplus is going to be determined by interactions between many, many self-interested buyers and sellers. Is the market allocation desirable, or would some different allocation make society better off? What's the answer? Remember when we talked about trade-offs in one of the first lectures about core principles of microeconomics? There's a trade-off between, there are different trade-offs, efficiency versus equality, but we redefined equality as equity. Certainly, from the standpoint of efficiency, the total surplus, if that is your measure, then markets that are well-functioning, that aren't subject to failures, and we'll talk about different types of failures down the road, or externalities or environmental degradation, those markets will be efficient in the sense of maximizing total surplus, where total surplus is the sum of both producer and consumer surplus. And quite obviously, this says nothing about equality or nothing about equity. It only focuses on efficiency. So efficiency is measured here as the value to buyers less the cost to